In the previous lesson, you've learned how to add the Docker Compose file to the repository on Azure, and how do you actually work with multiple remotes also with Git. That's an important thing to understand. Now it's time to actually add the Docker Compose job as part of the pipeline task. Also, before you do that, make sure your Docker Compose file is written correctly and you're pointing to the Azure repository here. That's because you're publishing the images to the Azure container registry. So when you deploy it, you have to pull it from the same place. So this image might need some modification if you if you have set up the Azure registry already, and accordingly you add the image URL here. Now let's go back to the pipelines here. So I have this pipeline which is building and publishing to ACR. If I click on this and start editing, you can edit the pipeline from here, top right corner. It opens up the YAML editor, and if you observe, it has the stages to build and to publish this to the Azure container registry. That is this step here, right? It's just one stage with one step. Actually, what I'm going to do is add another stage. Stage starts from here. So have stages, and then I add another stage here and call it as deploy to dev. So dev deploy is what I'm going to call this. I can add some description for the stage. So each stage, if you observe the structure, the syntax, each stage can have a display name, can have jobs, and the jobs have steps. That's where you add tasks. So I'm just going to copy this entire thing from here and build and publish. So okay, Docker Compose deploy to dev. Job, I'm gonna say deploy to dev. I'm gonna keep this as is. And then I need to add some tasks here, starting with this place. Steps is where I add some tasks. So tasks I can pick from the right hand side here. This is how you can customize any pipeline. So we want to deploy using Docker Compose. So I can actually pick Docker Compose here. If you just search for Docker, there are actually multiple things. So Docker CLI installer, you can use Docker to build, publish images, login, logout, run some commands with Docker actually, or use Docker Compose. Let's pick Docker Compose this time, and Azure Container Registry is what we want to use. This wouldn't matter because we are not publishing it to the registry, we're pulling it from the registry and so on. So it might need access, so you will need it anyways. So I pick my registry s of dreg here. Docker Compose file is with YAML. If you don't do this, you might get an error later because our file has a suffix of YAML, not YML. Originally it was YML, I added that A. So make sure you change this part. We don't have any additional Docker Compose files or environment variables. Project name can be as is. So what we want to do is we want to connect to this server which is running our Azure cloud. TCP, it's exposed on TCP. We want to connect to this and run our stack. Right now it's not running anything. So once it launches that stack, and every time there's a change, it should just use this as a dev environment and publish to that. Right, so let's pick that command here. So run a Docker Compose command. We'll say run service images. Right, so you can actually build, you can publish using push. So instead of that Docker build and publish command, you can also use this one with Docker Compose. Right, so this time we just want to launch the stack. So we'll say run service images. That's good enough. We don't want the images to be built. Run in the background, yes, that's fine. Our services should be running in the background. And this part is important. So you have to go to advanced options, because how does this job connect to this Docker host is where the service account comes into play, or service connection comes into play. So Docker host service connection we have already added earlier, if you remember that in the previous lesson. And that's what you have to pick. So I have provided all the certificates needed, the URL to connect to the Docker host and all that. So I picked up this host now, and I'll review it and add the task. So Azure Container Registry, the file name has been changed to YAML. Run service images is what we want to run. We don't want to build images. And Docker service connection. That's it. Let's click on add. Now this is cool, because when you click on add, you can configure everything through graphical UI and then click on add and it comes up here. This is just amazing, right? So what is going to happen now is there is a stage which says build. This is going to build and publish, build and push to ACR. And then comes the dev deploy stage, or let's just call it as deploy stage. And the task is going to be Docker Compose deploy to dev, or let's just call it as deploy to dev. Right? So we have deploy stage here. This is going to work with Docker Compose. It has been configured with the registry, anything that is needed in order to access that, and it's going to run the services, where it's going to run it with this connection, service connection. So let's save it and find out what happens. Commit. All right, so this should have committed now, and the build should have been triggered. If I go back to the pipelines, these builds have been paused. This one has been triggered. All right, interestingly, now you see two stages. There's a build and push stage. There is a deploy to dev stage. Let's go and find out what's happening. Right, so there is a build stage, and then there is a deploy to dev. This is the second stage. So first it's going to build the image. The same image is going to get deployed here. How the same image? Because we are publishing it with the latest as a tag, and the same tag is being used in or referenced in Docker Compose. So let me fast forward or skip till the build fun finishes, and when it comes back to dev or deploy to dev, I'll start again. All right, so the build job has finished, deploy has failed. Let's find out why. You can actually find out the issue here, and it says, all right, couldn't connect to the Docker daemon at this. Is it even running? Now, this could be few things here to debug. So let's actually debug this in the next lesson. I'll talk about a bunch of things, and I'll also show you how to actually troubleshoot these kind of issues. This seems like a network issue or a issue with the actual Docker daemon. Let's find out which one it is.